Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
The economic impact and the steps toward recovery from COVID-19. Tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes with the Daily Memphian, and thanks for joining us as we continue to do the show remotely. I am joined tonight for a conversation about the economic impact locally of COVID-19. And first up is Beverly Robertson, President and CEO of the Greater Memphis Chamber of Commerce. Beverly, thanks for being here again.
Glad to be here with you, Eric.
We're also joined by Ted Townsend, who is Chief Economic Development Officer with the Chamber. Ted, thanks for being here.
Thank you very much, Eric.
Along with Bill Dries, reporter with the Daily Memphian. We'll talk about COVID has hit the whole world, obviously. You don't mean to tell you that, but it has had particular impacts here in Memphis. And there is sort of, I don't want to get too excited, but there is some hope on the horizon with vaccine distribution improving for all its flaws. And we can maybe begin to look towards where we've been and where we're going economically on the local level. And so for you, Beverly, the first question, and then the same to Ted, what from your point of view is the biggest hit that the Memphis area has taken in this last year of pandemic, and how do we recover from those very bad hits that we have taken?
Well, I will tell you that the small businesses have been hit tremendously bad. And as a result, some of them are shuttered. Some remain open, but are only making marginal profits. Many have had to release their employees and are struggling themselves to be able to maintain some sense of business. And that's why the Greater Memphis Chamber literally had a session or a series of sessions with small businesses to really talk about how we build resilience among them. And those sessions occurred over a 2-month period. And that was really important because at the end of the day, what we will have is a document or playbook that will help them. If situations like this ever occur again, it will help them better navigate it. And of course, the lodging and hospitality industry is the other industry that was hit tremendously, and we'll be working with them as well. But I would also say individuals have been hit, and a lot of people are losing their houses, not able to pay their rents or their mortgages. Young students, college students are not able to pay their college loans. So there are a lot of repercussions, or I should say a lot of collateral damage that has resulted from this pandemic. And the Chamber is working with certainly the businesses to try to ensure that we stabilize them and help them to grow. And one thing that will help us is our ability to continue to attract new investment into the marketplace and help existing businesses expand and grow. And we are all about doing that.
Let me, to you, Ted, I mean, I think we all know and have seen, that people talk about this K-shaped recovery or even the K-shaped impact of COVID in the sense that, I can do my job from home. I may be stir crazy and slightly bored and tired of these walls, but I have my laptop and I have a computer, and all the people at the Daily Memphian and many businesses are like that. And this last year, if you had a 401k, you probably saw gains. If you had a house, you probably saw value appreciation and maybe got to refinance your loan. But if you didn't have that kind of job and you didn't have that kind of economic underpinning, you had to go into work probably, wherever that was at great risk potentially. And a lot of job losses were in more hourly workers and those kinds of positions. It was a very, in many ways, very stratified nationally, and I'm not picking on Memphis here, impact that COVID has had. How do you respond to that? Is that what you've seen? And again, to some of Beverly's points, how do we as a community and you as a chamber help the community come back from where we've been?
Yeah, well, thanks for that, Eric. You've seen a recovery of the job losses. I've been tracking that. We're still 3% behind where we need to be. But what's really important is that we've recovered 73% of those job jobs that we lost in the March and April timeframe of last year, where it was a precipitous drop, obviously. I think that pre-COVID, obviously Memphis was seeing a boom of capital investment in various projects in our community. And that, I believe, makes it less spongy in terms of a recovery and resiliency. There's some key ingredient there of resiliency that I'm tracking. And I will also say that from a project perspective, we have over 40 projects in our pipeline right now. In fact, we've received 5 just this week. That's encouraging. I think businesses are looking at making investments, they're looking at moving their capital, they're looking at creating jobs. And that bodes very well for the Memphis economy. So our focus is really laser targeted on making sure that we close on some of these projects, making sure that we help existing businesses that are here in the Memphis market that have expressed interest in investment and creating jobs, that they get through these transactions and that we see contributions of that directly to our economy. I feel that there's a great sense of momentum. Memphis is moving. And I'm encouraged by the key economic indicators that we're tracking right now.
Let me bring in Bill Dries. Bill.
Ted, to your point, have we seen the workforce move around? And I'm referring specifically to something that Kevin Kane talked about at the outset of this pandemic, when he talked about how some of the tourism and hospitality workers might have gone to other jobs, in some cases jobs that may have paid better. So has our workforce been rearranged by this to some degree?
Yeah, thanks, Bill. I think there has been some shift in the workforce. Certainly, people will follow opportunity as they should, and so we're monitoring that. But I think that the focus that we have at the chamber is on the jobs that are within our pipeline, opportunity jobs, high quality jobs, that I think will give the workforce here in Memphis even more options for when they come online. They have options to onboard with these exciting firms that are providing new opportunities for them in the Memphis market that may have been non-traditional from their backgrounds. And again, if you couple that with our efforts with Upskill 901, where we're looking at taking individuals in the Memphis market where they are in their career pathway, upskilling them to new opportunities within the career of their choice. That is where we're going to see the increase in per capita income. We're going to see the increments and improvement of GDP, and overall the condition of the Memphis market will improve.
Beverly, time is money, and the longer that this recovery takes, the more perilous it becomes for businesses big and small. So I'm wondering how perilous is this period where we're on the way back? In some ways, it seems like it's probably more dangerous in some ways than the pandemic itself was, or is.
You make a good observation, Bill, and I would simply say, if we think back to 2008, when there was a significant economic downturn, it took us about 10 years to recover. The difference, though, is that we weren't all isolated from each other. I actually think, and based on what I've read from economic forecasts, particularly McKinsey and Company, who actually did a webinar for the Greater Memphis Chamber, along with Bill Rhodes from AutoZone and Rick Shadiak. And one of the things they said is they expect that this pandemic will be reduced significantly by the end of the summer, and that we will begin to see recovery in markets like Memphis and others across the country. And by the end of the year, when the pandemic, they believe, will be totally under control, that the next year will be a very successful year, certainly as everything gets back to some measure of normalcy. So I am optimistic because of the data that Ted said. About 73% of the jobs have already been filled or reestablished, and people are seeking and gaining employment. And I'm also encouraged because I think once travel is renewed, then we will be able to see some significant hits If you couple that with our economic development attraction strategies to attract new investment and help existing businesses grow, then I think we're in a good position to see the economy come back over the next couple of years pretty strongly. And we don't have to wait 10 years to be able to see that. And what has been so optimistic for me is the number of companies that continue to look at Memphis as a major player in this economic ecosystem. So we are encouraged and we're optimistic here at the Greater Memphis Chamber about the possibilities for Memphis.
Before I go back to Eric, let me ask you about the stimulus package that the president is in the process of taking to Congress. A lot of debate about how much is enough and how much is enough to really make sure that the economy comes all the way back. Where is the chamber on what that stimulus package should include?
We actually have not taken a position on yay or nay, but what we do know is this economy does need to have stimulation, both from a business perspective and individual perspective, because what we realize is that there are some industries that continue to grow during the pandemic, but there are also many other industries that are dying or on life support. And if something is not done, something substantial, something significant is not done to spur that growth and development, to allow them to come back, to help them to get things moving in the right direction again, we're going to lose a lot of businesses in this country. And those businesses employ lots of people. That means that our unemployment rates will climb if they don't get some economic support and some economic stimulation to allow them to rebuild, allow them to grow, and allow them to expand. So we certainly are in support of additional stimulus dollars. And I'll leave it to the folks smarter than I am to determine what that amount ought to be, because that's a little bit above my pay grade, Bill. I wish I could weigh in specifically on that, but I do know it is imperative that we receive those stimulus dollars, some measure of stimulus dollars.
Let me, go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, Ted, what do you think getting over the hump looks like for our economy in particular here in Memphis?
Yeah, well, thanks. I would say that both with respect to the stimulus, it's important for Memphis to skate to where the puck may be. Either way, as we bolster e-commerce and support transportation, distribution, and logistics, which is obviously an inherent strength here in the market, I think also pursuing other subsectors and opportunity clusters is really critical for our strategy moving forward. We have the Mass Economic Study. Obviously, it mirrors very well and aligns very well with the state strategy on economic development and focusing on industry clusters. And that is where we're going to divert all of our attention to working with companies within those areas that obviously Memphis has those strengths. We're looking at deepening those strengths within those opportunity clusters so that we have more shots on goal. I feel very encouraged by not only the mix of projects in our pipeline now. I mentioned over 40. Those represent nearly 5,000 jobs, almost $2 billion in capital investment. The average wages of those are 64,000 and above. So I feel like we are poised to really seize that pent up demand and respond to it. I think other markets have been known as the IT city in their past. That's a fad. I'd like to have Memphis be the fit city, whereas we are the best fit for this new investment that is on the horizon.
Let me, a couple of things that we talked a bit about tourism and Bill, I think, mentioned Kevin Kane. We will have Kevin Kane from Memphis Travel, formerly the Convention Visitors Bureau, on the show next week, as well as Denny Riley, who is co-owner of a restaurant downtown, also on the board of the Downtown Memphis Commission. And certainly restaurants have been kind of the poster child for the hit that businesses have taken, and particularly small businesses. So we'll get deeper into that next week. Another thing we're doing in a few weeks from now is diving back into the conversation about pilots, and we'll have Reed Dullberger from Edge, which is the kind of group that administers the pilot tax incentives, and we'll have some county commissioners and city council people who are for and against. We're going to do a couple shows. And to you, Beverly, this debate about pilots, the debate about which are payments in lieu of taxes, they are a very commonly used tax incentive here in Memphis. I would assume that some of the projects that Ted has talked about could end up involving, having pilots, tax incentives to make them happen. The sort of billions of dollars in investment that were either projected or have been underway throughout this pandemic, big developments downtown especially, but elsewhere, have involved pilots and other types of tax incentives. Where do you stand? Where does the chamber stand, Beverly, on pilot reform? Are you concerned about what some elected officials are talking about reducing the reliance on pilots and putting more checks and steps in place before pilots are given? Or do you welcome that debate, and do you welcome more involvement from, say, the city council and the county commission?
Well, I will tell you that unfortunately, having incentives is the cost of entry in playing. If you don't offer incentives, you don't play. That means you have no ability to attract new businesses and higher level investments and higher wage jobs into the marketplace. So that is just the cost of entry, and that's a reality. So if we're not offering it and everybody else in the United States is offering it, guess where that place is? Memphis. And that is the stark reality of what we are talking about. So when we talk about reform, I think that since we only have one tool in our toolkit, and that really is tax abatements. Other cities have cash tax abatements and other offerings that are attractive to businesses that are interested in coming into the marketplace. But we have one tool. And if that tool is cut off, then we have issues. I don't have any problem at all having a discussion, trying to identify what the elected officials feel, what their questions are, whether or not their questions are being satisfied. I think the chamber can play a role in helping to satisfy some of those questions, provide some answers. And really, I think that when you think about the city council and the county commission, there are a lot of new members on both who don't really have history. They may not be fully educated about pilots and their value and how Memphis sits relative to competition and other size markets and those that are surrounding us. So I think that a discussion is always good. I think conversations are always good, but I will say that there is no way we will be able to attract new investment, higher wage jobs. And even if we decided that we wanted to suspend that for a period of time, that might as well be a suspension for the next 5 years, because once you are not in the game, then you are forgotten about. So I would say discussion is good, dialogue is wonderful. It's great to understand where the issues are and try to address them. But I really think it is vital to the success of this marketplace and to the success of our work to certainly have incentives.
Ted, before you worked with the chamber, you spent some time doing government affairs for the University of Memphis, but you spent 7, almost 8 years under the Haslam administration in the, I'll get the name wrong, but the Division of Economic and Community Development for the state. You were ultimately the chief of staff and chief operating officer. So two questions. Sometimes we'll see, or I will see, and people debating this pilot and the tax incentive. A question is, well, Nashville doesn't use them. Other cities in Tennessee don't use them. Why does Memphis rely so heavily on them? So I'm curious, from that state perspective, was that how you saw it? And the second thing is, at the states are competing against states, cities against cities, Memphis against Mississippi, and to some degree. So what is that landscape nationally, state by state, within the use of incentives? And again, with cities within Tennessee, what is the landscape like?
Yeah, thanks. It's highly competitive. When I was at the state, obviously, we were competing against other states, and the projects they're really, there's a lot of pre-selection before they even enter the pipeline for consideration. And the state's position was always, and as we considered grants and incentives, for these, we were always asking the question, is the local community participating? And that included Nashville. And if the answer was was yes, then you had a co-investment partner. And obviously what we're focused on here in Memphis is creating a competitive environment so that when the state has projects that are derived there and they're considering the best location to compete, that they see Memphis as one of those markets that they can run through the tape at the finish line on this opportunity. So it's highly competitive, and we're competing not just with Mississippi, Arkansas, or even other communities in Tennessee. We're competing globally, and I've stated recently, you know, it's a win or learn opportunity. You don't lose necessarily. You have the opportunity to learn why you didn't land that, and what we need to do to make the market more competitive. I'm looking at ways in which we can build a war chest that includes both incentives, but also having a workforce advantage, having an infrastructure advantage. We have so many attributes right now. And I think one that has entered the consciousness of these site selection criteria is our resiliency with respect to diversity and inclusion. That is a huge strength for us in the market, where you have companies that are looking at ways in which they can diversify their own employee base and be in a community that faces these issues soberly, with a mature posture, and one that is focused on partnership. And so I am really excited about the way that we can position Memphis in unique ways, reflect on our differentiating factors, and certainly incentives are always within that conversation. They don't always necessarily have to be the tipping point, but if you look at these are multi-decade transactional commitments to a community. And we have to focus on that. And the finances are certainly an important part of that. The livability, the cost of doing business is there. And those are all of the factors that here at the Greater Memphis Chamber, we're focusing on strengthening of that. So we're less resilient or reliant, I should say, on just one component of the deal making.
With a few minutes left here, Bill, go to you.
Let me ask you then, what are the lessons of Electrolux, a company that came here when we were really struggling with the worst recession since the Great Depression, and a company that really I think stayed here about as long as the pilot lasted, or maybe not even that long. What's the lesson from that?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of examples like that, Bill, across the Tennessee landscape of economic development. It's not the first time it's happened. You know, I think we focus on making it the last time that it happens. But there's a lot of fluidity in the market. Sometimes you can't predict where the market trends will go. But I think if you focus on protecting the taxpayer base of incentives, through accountability, reimbursement models. You know, if you have more shots on goal, you're less in a position to maybe give too much on the deal. We want businesses selecting Memphis because it positions them from a point of strength. It enhances their business model and market entry and allows for them to grow. It's not just because we gave them a building or we gave them a pilot. That's you know, the incentive part of it is always there, but maybe we don't have to forsake too much to land a company if we've created an environment that is highly competitive with the industries that we are selecting and targeting that are very attractive to us.
Mm-hmm. Beverly, if I can ask you about the idea of looking at the average wage that a company pays that might come here and might get a pilot incentive. Is it possible for that average to look really good, like $60,000, $65,000 a year, but yet for most of the employees of the company to make around $40,000 because the executives make such high salaries that the average winds up being higher than most of the employees of that company make?
Yes, I certainly believe that it is possible, but I think there are also some accountability measures that are put in place to assess and evaluate what companies have said they're going to do versus what they are doing. So there is accountability. I mean, I know that EDGE has processes established and put in place, and they inform companies in advance that they're going to get a scorecard and they will be assessed and evaluated, and there will be some consequences, or at least some counseling, some information imparted, and consequences for not being able to deliver against what they committed to. And I think as opposed to punishment, it's more, what is it that we can do to help you maximize or be able to meet what you said was necessary? Are there things that we need to do as an organization to allow you to live up to what you have defined? But I don't think companies come here and they're just scot-free. I think they come here, we are hopeful that they will deliver against what they promised. But if they haven't, there are consequences, even in the bodies of the agreements. There are also clawbacks that can be put in place so that if a company says, I'm going to be here a certain period of time and you're not, then there are things that are built within the contract or the agreement that would say, well, if you're not, here are some of the things that will happen, and here's some of the things that we want. So I don't want you to think that that's just something that is done and they're left to their own devices. There are accountability measures in place.
And we will be, as I said, we're out of time, unfortunately. And thank you, Beverly, and thank you, Ted. And we have a couple of shows coming up in the next weeks on pilots and the debate over reform and change. But again, that is all the time we have right now. Remember, you can get past episodes of the show on WKNO.org, or you can just search Behind the Headlines on YouTube, or you can download the full podcast of the show on the Daily Memphian site, iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks, and we'll see you next week.